everybody. So for today, we're going to be talking about intersectionality. And I have to say, so intersectionality is actually considered a critical theory. So we're back under this critical theory umbrella, but it has a lot of technicalities to it that I thought maybe deserved its own video. So I wanted to spend a little time just kind of honing in on this one. So before we can talk about intersectionality as a theory, I do want to review just kind of a quick sociological concept. And that's this idea of social identities. And you may have heard this term before, or maybe not. But often, when sociologists say the word social identity, we're thinking about things like race, class, gender, and sexuality. So we have personal identities, right? Like I'm a professor, I'm someone that really loves to play guitar, or I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I love to do it, right? Like I'm family oriented. These are pieces of who I am, right? Those aren't my social identities though. Social identities are the larger socially constructed categories that I belong to. And the reason sociologists talk about these is because they really have a major impact on our life. In fact, they're kind of the organization systems of our society. So we call them social because they're held by more than one person. They're held by a combination of people. Everyone has a race, they have a class, they have a gender. These things are often kind of given to you. Maybe you can kind of shift them around, but when you were born, they're kind of put on you. And then they're shared with others. It's really a way we categorize people. So they're social in nature. And then they're also socially constructed. They're things that our society made up because we wanted a way to organize things. And so our membership into these different groups is part of our social identity, and then it's connected to a larger social structure. So when I say things like social identity organizes our society, I think one of the easiest ways to see this is looking at gender, right? So we have gender categories. Often these are kind of ascribed to you. So when you're born, you're assumed to have a gender. People kind of socialize you and raise you based off of that gender, right? And then how people interact with you throughout your life is often largely shaped by your gender. I mean, the fact that every time my parents need something moved in their house, they ask, my brother-in-law instead of me to help them with it. Part of that is gender, right? Because men are supposed to do the manual labor, they do the heavy lifting. And so even though I personally think I could do it too, I don't have the best upper arm strength, but I can lift some stuff. I'm dedicated, right? It still my gender shaped how people interacted with me, gender shaped who my parents decide to ask for help. So it shapes our interactions, but it also organizes our social structures. In American society, we have very gendered types of jobs. So there are some jobs that tend to have way more women in them, some jobs that tend to have way more men in them. They often fall along these lines of gender norms, right? The physical, manual labor jobs, technical jobs tend to be really male dominated. The more helping professions tend to be more female dominated. Traditionally, home and family life was organized by gender. What role people took in the household, right, was partially determined by the gender that they were. And so again, gender it organizes our society. So again, when I say it's a social identity, it's because it has very real social impacts. So if we can understand that basis, right, that everyone has a social identity, we can then start getting into the ways these identities intersect, because they don't all just exist completely separate from each other, right? You don't have like a race that is completely separate from your gender, that's completely separate from your class, that's completely separate from your sexuality. They're all kind of interwoven in each other. But that's not often how we used to talk about these things as a society. So intersectionality was created to better understand these relationships. This is something that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. So she is a legal scholar. So she's a critical legal scholar. Remember, critical theories are really originated in the field of law. Or not, sorry, critical race theories and originated in the field of law. So Kimberly Crenshaw was a legal scholar. She spent a lot of time studying legal cases. She spent some time studying worker discrimination lawsuits and looking at court transcripts and records and outcomes for different lawsuits related to workplace discrimination. And she noticed a very interesting pattern. So she noticed when she looked at Black women's lawsuits, right, their court cases of workplace discrimination, that they were often thrown out. They weren't ruled in favor of the Black women that were making the complaint. And part of that was due to the structure of these types of lawsuits. So when you filed for discrimination, at least in the 80s, I don't know if this is still true today, but when you filed for workplace discrimination, you had to pick what you were discriminated for. So you can say I was discriminated against based on my gender. You could say I was discriminated against based on my race. You couldn't do both. You had to choose one. And so she noticed that when Black women said, I'm being discriminated against based on my race, the judge would kind of look at the workplace and be like, well, there's a lot of Black men that work here. A lot of them seem like they're getting promoted. They're getting raises. I don't see how this company is racially discriminatory. And so they toss the case out. When Black women would file gender discrimination lawsuits and say, I think I'm being discriminated against based on my gender, judges would look at the workplace and they'd go, well, I see plenty of women at this workplace. Granted, they're all white, but they're getting raises, they're getting promoted. This company does not seem like it discriminates based on gender. And they would throw them out. And so Crenshaw was like, when we focus on one or the other, we're missing something really important. We're missing that maybe it wasn't just about gender, just about race, but the way race and gender work together to shape people's perceptions of Black women, right? Versus Black men and white women. And so Crenshaw kind of originally described intersectionality through like a metaphor to a road, saying, when you think about our common roads, right, when you get to an intersection, you have these two separate streets and they cross over each other, right? And so one street's clearly street A and the other street's clearly street B. But then when they cross over each other in that little square, you can't tell the difference. You don't know what speck of road is street A and one speck of road is street B. It's both. That intersection is both roads at the same time. And so Crenshaw argued that this is what happens with our social identities, like race, gender, class, sexuality, all of these things, they're separate. Like they are their own things. They're not the same. But throughout our lives, they weave in and out of each other, and we hit these intersections where the experience we have in life, how people interact with us, how institutions interact with us, you can't actually tell what's influencing it because the social identities are overlapping. And so she was very interested in looking at like how experiences can be different when these things are combined. So, people might have, for example, some shared experiences because of their gender. So say, if you identify as a man, right? There are parts of masculinity that might feel a little universal, that like by being a man, you kind of have these expectations placed on you, you have these experiences in the world. But then there's also ways that being a man can look different. So we'll discuss this in this course, right? That for Black men, that combination of race and gender tends to lead to people often perceiving them as being dangerous or threatening. And that shapes a lot of experiences throughout someone's life, right? Being perceived as being threatening. And it's not just about being a man, because not all men get that constant experience. And it's not just about being Black. It's about that intersection. It's about those two things. And so we all have intersections, right? Because we all have different social identities, and it's going to lead to very different experiences. And so I think it's just kind of important to think about some of that. And so this is a theory that, unlike some of the others, it's not going to be like directly applied of like, you read a case study and say, how do you apply intersectionality here? But it is a theory that kind of sets it's the lens through which we're going to look at some class content, right? Because when we talk about gender and crime, age and crime, race and crime, we're kind of naturally going to bring intersectionality into the fold to see how these things are kind of shaped by those intersections. But that's all I have for now. I feel like intersectionality is when it's been a buzzword lately. A lot of people use this word. It's become a little more mainstream. But in my experience, not everyone fully gets it, right? Like the application can be hard. So if you have any questions, if anything comes up, please feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.